My daughter-in-law slid the deed to a restaurant across my dinner table and told me it was time I bought her husband his dream. When I pushed it back to her, they didn't yell. They smiled. And 3 days later, a process server was knocking on my door with a lawsuit demanding $450,000. But they made one mistake. They forgot that a man who spent 35 years running kitchens in Atlanta knows how to keep a ledger. And when that judge looked at the numbers, he asked my son a single question that ended everything. My name is Walter Simmons. I am 66 years old, and for 35 years I owned and ran Simmons Soul Kitchen on the south side of Atlanta, the same restaurant my father opened with a card table and 2 folding chairs back in 1971. I built it up brick by brick, plate by plate, from a counter that sat 6 people to a dining room that sat 90, and a catering business that fed half the weddings and repasts in this city. I know what it costs to earn $1, because I spent 4 decades on my feet, earning them one at a time. But my son Marcus, he never learned that lesson, no matter how many times I tried to teach it to him. Before I tell you how I watched my own blood try to rob me, and how the truth came out in a courtroom full of strangers, do me a kindness. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight, because I want to know who's sitting with me while I tell this. I was sitting in a booth at Mary Mac's tea room, my napkin still folded in my lap, waiting on my son and his wife to show up for what was supposed to be a quiet Sunday dinner to celebrate my 66th birthday. They were 35 minutes late. No call, no text, nothing. When they finally walked in, Marcus had on a blazer that looked like it cost more than the used Buick I was driving, and on his arm was Renee, my daughter-in-law, wearing a smile that never once reached her eyes. They didn't hug me. They didn't wish me happy birthday first. Renee dropped into the booth, reached into a leather portfolio, and laid a folder down on the table right next to my sweet tea, hard enough that the ice rattled. "Happy birthday, Walter," she said, like she was doing me a favor just by saying it. "What is this?" I asked, keeping my hands folded in my lap. I didn't reach for it. Renee's smile got wider, colder. "It's an opportunity, Walter. The old Pemberton building on Auburn Avenue just came up for lease. Marcus has been wanting to open his own restaurant for years. You know that. This is the one. 4,500 square feet. Perfect location. Right near the new development. We just need $300,000 for the build-out and the first year of operating costs." I looked at my son. Marcus hadn't held a steady job in 4 years, not since he quit the assistant manager position I'd given him at my own restaurant, because he said he was above wiping down tables. Renee worked some kind of consulting job that I never understood, something to do with marketing for small businesses, though I'd never once seen her bring in a client. "That's a lot of money," I said, keeping my voice even. "Marcus has never run a kitchen in his life." "He grew up in your restaurant," Renee snapped. "He's been around it his whole life. That counts for something." "Watching is not the same as doing," I said. "I'm not signing anything, and I'm not wiring you $300,000. Renee's face went still and cold, like a door slamming shut behind her eyes. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," I said. "I worked 35 years for what I have. I'm not handing it over so my son can play restaurant owner." Marcus finally spoke, his jaw tight. "Dad, come on. You've got the building paid off. You sold the catering side for good money 2 years ago. You're sitting on it doing nothing while I'm struggling. It's embarrassing." "It's not doing nothing," I said. "It's my retirement. It's what I built so your mother and I wouldn't be a burden on anybody when we got old. And 2 years ago, when you wrecked that car driving drunk, I paid for the lawyer. 5 years ago, when you owed that man on Cascade Road for the card games, I paid that too, in cash, out of my own safe, because I was scared of what would happen to you if I didn't. I told you then. The bank of Walter Simmons was closed for good." Renee slapped her hand flat on the table, rattling the silverware. "You selfish old man. You're going to die one day with all that money sitting in an account doing nothing for anybody. Marcus has put up with you his whole life. He deserves this." "Put up with me," I repeated, feeling something cold settle into my chest. "I put him through Morehouse. I paid his rent for 6 years after he graduated and didn't have a job. I bought his first car. And now, you want a restaurant too?" A waitress came by, sensing the tension. "Everything all right over here?" Marcus stood up so fast his chair scraped back loud against the floor. No, everything is not all right. My father is sitting on a fortune and won't lift a finger to help his own son. People at the nearby tables turned to look. I stood up slowly, my knees aching the way they do after decades of standing on a kitchen line. I don't owe you a restaurant, Marcus, I said quietly. And since you've got money for a blazer like that, you can pick up the check for my own birthday dinner. I walked out into the warm Atlanta evening without looking back. But as the door swung shut behind me, I heard Renee's voice carry out after me. You'll regret this, Walter. We'll get what's ours one way or another. I got into my car and just sat there for a minute, hands on the wheel, not shaking from fear but from a deep, hollow disappointment, the kind that settles in your stomach like a stone. I drove home to the house I'd lived in for 30 years, a modest brick ranch in East Point that didn't look like much from the street. Most folks who knew me figured I was comfortable, maybe had a little put away. They had no idea that underneath the floorboards of my home office, in a fireproof safe my father had taught me to bolt into the concrete itself, sat the documents, proving I was worth just over $6 million, every cent of it earned with my own two hands. That night, my phone started buzzing on the kitchen counter. Once, twice, a dozen times. Texts from Renee. You are a disgrace to your son. We are not finished with you. You owe Marcus for everything he sacrificed working in that restaurant for free for years. I frowned at that last one. Marcus had never worked for free a day in his life. I paid him a manager's salary the entire time he worked for me, right up until the day he quit because I asked him to come in on a Saturday. I went into my study, moved the rug, and opened the floor safe to check on my will, because something about the way Renee screamed in that restaurant felt different than ordinary anger. It felt planned. My phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a text. It was an email, and the subject line froze, the blood in my veins. Notice of civil complaint. I put on my reading glasses and opened the attachment with hands that had gone strangely steady, the way they always did right before a dinner rush, when there was no time left to panic. Plaintiffs, Marcus Simmons and Renee Simmons. Defendant, Walter Simmons. Cause of action, breach of oral contract and unjust enrichment. Amount demanded, $450,000. The complaint claimed that 2 years earlier, on the day I sold the catering division of my business for a large sum, I had verbally promised Marcus a 15% share as compensation for years of unpaid consulting and business development work he supposedly performed for the company. It claimed I had broken that promise, causing him severe emotional and financial harm. Consulting work. Marcus had been in Miami for a long weekend with friends the week I closed that sale. He didn't even know I'd sold it until he called asking to borrow money for rent 3 weeks later. I sat back in my chair a long time, staring at the glow of the computer screen in my dark study. They thought I was an old man who'd fooled the second a lawyer's letter showed up on my porch. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I picked up my phone and called a number I hadn't dialed in years. Harold Whitfield, the best civil attorney in the city, a man who'd helped me draft every contract I'd signed in 30 years of business. He answered on the third ring, his voice rough with sleep. Walter Simmons, he said. It's nearly midnight. This better be good. I'm being sued, Harold, I said. By my own son. There was a long pause, then a low, dry laugh. The boy who can't hold a job longer than 6 months? What's he asking for? $450,000, I said. Claims I promised him a cut of the catering sale. Oral contract, Harold said. Hard to prove, annoying to fight. You want to settle this quiet, Walter? Cut him 50 grand and make it disappear? I looked at the photograph on my desk. Marcus, at 6 years old, in a tiny chef's hat I'd bought him, grinning with a missing front tooth. Then I looked at the lawsuit glowing on my screen. No, I said. I don't want to settle. I want to find out why they need this money so bad, and I want to make sure they never come at me again. I could hear the smile creep into Harold's voice. Then be at my office at 8 in the morning. Bring everything. And Walter, wear your good suit. We're going to war. The next morning at 7 o'clock, a heavy fist pounded on my front door. Through the peephole, I saw a Fulton County deputy standing on my porch. Walter Simmons? he asked when I opened the door. "You've been served." He handed me a thick envelope and walked back to his patrol car parked right in front of my driveway. Lights off, but presence loud enough that I saw my neighbor Mrs. Caldwell's curtains twitch across the street. By noon, the whole block would know the sheriff had visited Walter Simmons. I drove downtown to Harold's office on the 18th floor, overlooking the Atlanta skyline I'd watched grow up around me my whole life. He read through the complaint slowly, his face giving nothing away. "It's sloppy," he finally said, tossing it onto his desk. "They've got witnesses listed, Renee's parents, claiming they overheard this promise at a family cookout 2 years ago." "That's a lie," I said. "Renee's parents barely speak to me. They wouldn't come to my cookout if I paid them gas money. People perjure themselves for $450,000 every single day," Harold said, shrugging. "But here's what's interesting, Walter. Look at the number. It's not round. It's not 1,000,000. It's 450,000. Specific, precise. That's not a greedy reach. That's a debt." He leaned forward. "I want to bring in an investigator I trust. Man named Otis Greer. Used to work fraud cases for the DA's office. If your son and his wife are in some kind of trouble, Otis will find it. But Walter, I need to know how far you're willing to let this go. If we dig and we find something real, it could end with your son in handcuffs." I thought about the look on Marcus's face in that restaurant, the way he let Renee call me a selfish old man and said nothing to stop her. "He's not my son right now," I said. "He's a plaintiff. Treat him like one." We spent the next 3 hours signing authorizations for financial background checks, subpoenas for records, everything Harold said we'd need. When I left his office that afternoon, I felt lighter, like I had a plan, like I wasn't just standing there waiting to get hit again. But the enemy wasn't resting either. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a bank alert. Someone had tried to access my main account 3 times with the wrong PIN before it locked. I called the bank immediately and froze everything. An hour later came a text from a number I didn't recognize. "We know about the cash payments you made off the books in the 90s. Pay us or we send everything to the IRS." I actually laughed out loud in that parking garage. I'd been audited in 1996, and the IRS ended up owing me money. They were throwing mud at the wall, hoping something would stick, and that confirmed exactly what Harold suspected. They were desperate. 2 days later, I was back in Harold's office, and Otis Greer was sitting across from him with a thin manila folder on the desk. Otis was a quiet, careful man who didn't waste words. "You were right to dig," he said. "This was never about the restaurant. The restaurant is the front." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Renee," Otis said, opening the folder. "She's not a marketing consultant. Not really. For the last 8 months, she's been running what's basically a small Ponzi scheme out of a Facebook group, telling women in your neighborhood she could double their money in a private investment club. She's collected almost $280,000 from 11 different women, most of them church members, several of them elderly." My stomach turned over. 280,000. "And here's the kicker," Otis said. 2 of those women have already gone to the district attorney's office asking questions. There's an investigation opening up. She needs to either return the money fast to make it look like a legitimate, if poorly performing investment, or she needs to disappear with it before charges get filed. I looked at Harold. "The restaurant," I said slowly, "was never about Marcus's dream." "Exactly," Harold said. "She needed $300,000 in cash, fast, with a legitimate paper trail, a business loan that could explain where the money came from if anyone came asking. When you said no to financing it directly, the lawsuit became Plan B. $450,000 would cover the $280,000 she stole, the legal fees, and leave her enough to run if it came to that." "And Marcus?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Does he know?" Otis slid a photograph across the table. Marcus and Renee outside a bank, Marcus's face tight with fear. "He's listed as a co-signer on 3 of the accounts she used to move the money," Otis said. "If she goes down, he goes down with her." I sat there feeling sick in a way I hadn't felt since my wife passed. My son wasn't just greedy. He was an accomplice to a crime against women from our own church, women I'd known for 20 years. "So what do we do?" I asked. "Do we call the police right now?" Harold leaned back, a slow, sharp smile spreading across his face. "Not yet. If we call now, the lawsuit drags on for 2 years while the criminal case crawls along separately. I want them to walk into a courtroom thinking they've already won. I want them on record, under oath, lying. And then we drop everything we have at once. The following Friday, Renee called demanding a settlement meeting at her attorney's office, a cramped storefront practice wedged between a nail salon and a check cashing place out on Campbellton Road. Harold coached me carefully. I was to play the part of a tired, scared old man ready to write a check, just to make it all go away. I wore an old cardigan that had belonged to my late wife's brother, walked with a slight stoop, let my voice tremble when I spoke. I taped a small digital recorder inside my jacket pocket, the same kind Otis used for surveillance work, no bigger than a pack of gum. Marcus and Renee were already seated when I walked in, Renee in a sharp white suit, looking triumphant, Marcus pale and sweating despite the air conditioning. Their lawyer, a heavy-set man named Pruitt with a tie too wide for his shirt, slid a thin settlement agreement across the table. My clients are willing to drop the suit for $450,000, no admission of wrongdoing. Clean break, Pruitt said. I let my hand shake as I reached for my checkbook. I just want this to be over, I said softly. I don't want to fight with my family anymore. Renee's eyes lit up like a woman watching a slot machine line up. Write it, she said. We want a cashier's check today. There's just one thing, I said, my voice still trembling. My accountant told me if I write this as payment for a contract, like the lawsuit says, that's taxable income for you, Marcus. You'd owe the federal government almost 40% of it. I watched the color drain from Renee's face. They hadn't thought about taxes. They needed every dollar to cover the hole in her stolen funds. Make it a gift, then, Marcus blurted out before Renee could stop him. Just make it a gift, Dad. No taxes on a gift. But son, I said, looking him dead in the eye, if it's a gift, that means there was never a contract. It means I never promised you anything. It means this whole lawsuit isn't true. Marcus didn't even hesitate. Who cares what it means? Just call it whatever you have to call it. Write the check. I looked at Renee. Is this a gift, Renee? Or do I legally owe this money for some consulting work that never happened? She glared at me with pure hatred, but greed and fear of prison won out over pride. It's a gift, she hissed. There was no contract. We made it up because you wouldn't help your own family. Are you happy? Now give us the money. I finished writing the check, signed it, and slid it across the table. Renee snatched it up and pressed it to her chest, like a woman who'd just been saved from drowning. Then I stood up straight, the stoop gone from my back, and reached into my jacket. Thank you, I said, my voice no longer trembling at all. You just confirmed on tape that this entire lawsuit was fabricated and that you're attempting to extort me. And Renee, that check is dated for the year 2045. You can cash it when I'm dead, which according to you should be any day now. Renee shrieked and lunged across the table at me, nails out, before Pruitt grabbed her by the waist and hauled her back. I walked out of that office and didn't look back, the sound of her screaming following me out into the parking lot like music. Monday morning, the Fulton County Courthouse was packed with curious onlookers. Renee's parents sat in the front row, ready to lie under oath about a cookout that never happened. The judge, the Honorable Patricia Renfro, a stern woman known for having zero patience for foolishness in her courtroom, took the bench. Pruitt opened with a story about a devoted son who'd given his father years of unpaid loyalty only to be cast aside out of spite. Harold's opening was 4 sentences long. The evidence would show no contract, no work performed, and a lawsuit built entirely to extort a man who had already given his son more than most fathers give in a lifetime. Renee's mother took the stand first, swearing she'd heard me promise Marcus 15% of the sale at a 4th of July cookout 2 years prior. Harold didn't even cross-examine her. He simply said, "No questions, Your Honor." A silence so confident it unsettled the whole room. Then Harold called Marcus to the stand himself. "Mr. Simmons," Harold began, "you claim you provided consulting services to your father's catering business for years, leading up to the sale. Is that correct?" "Yes," Marcus said, his voice shaking. "I worked hard for that company." Harold walked back to the defense table and lifted a thick stack of papers. I have here your tax returns for the 2 years preceding the sale, obtained through a court order. In both years, you reported zero income from Simmons' Soul Kitchen. In fact, you filed for unemployment benefits during that exact period, swearing under penalty of perjury that you had no job and no income. He set the documents down hard on the railing of the witness stand. So I'll ask you plainly, Mr. Simmons, were you lying to the state of Georgia to collect unemployment, or are you lying to this court right now? Because you cannot have been both employed and unemployed at the same time. Marcus opened his mouth and nothing came out. He looked at Renee. She stared straight ahead, her face a mask of stone, already cutting him loose. Answer the question, Judge Renfro said, her voice cold and sharp. I was helping out, Marcus stammered. Informally. That is not what your sworn affidavit to the Georgia Department of Labor says, Harold said. Your Honor, the defense moves to enter these tax records into evidence. The plaintiff has now demonstrated a documented pattern of lying under oath for financial gain. The judge's face had gone hard as granite. Mr. Simmons, you understand you may have just confessed to a federal crime in my courtroom. Harold wasn't finished. He turned to the bench. Your Honor, the defense has one final piece of evidence, and it concerns the co-plaintiff, Mrs. Renee Simmons, and the true origin of the funds she desperately needs. Renee's head snapped up, and in that instant, I watched her understand that we knew everything. She stood before the judge could even respond, bursting into loud theatrical tears, accusing me and Harold of harassment, of trying to destroy a hard-working woman's reputation out of pure cruelty. Judge Renfro watched her over her glasses, entirely unmoved, and waited until she ran out of breath. Are you finished, Mrs. Simmons? Harold approached the bench and handed over a sealed envelope bearing the seal of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Your Honor, this is a certified report from the Financial Crimes Division, obtained through subpoena. It details a pattern of fraud committed by the plaintiff against 11 victims, several of them members of Mount Carmel Baptist Church, totaling $280,000. The judge read in silence for a long time, her frown deepening with every page. Finally, she looked up, directly at Renee. According to this report, you solicited investments from elderly church members under false pretenses and have not returned a single dollar. And the amount you are suing your father-in-law for in this courtroom, $450,000, happens to match almost exactly what you owe those victims, plus legal fees. She removed her glasses. Is that a coincidence, Mrs. Simmons? Or is this courtroom the last stop on a scheme to launder stolen money through a fake lawsuit? Renee swayed on her feet. That's not. I didn't. The judge nodded once toward the back of the courtroom. Two investigators who had been seated quietly among the spectators rose and walked forward. Renee Simmons, you're under arrest for securities fraud and theft by deception. The cuffs clicked shut around her wrists as she screamed that it had been Marcus's idea, that he'd helped her open the accounts, that he knew everything from the start. Marcus shouted back that she was the liar, that she'd told him it was a legitimate investment club. But two investigators were already walking toward him too, citing his name on the fraudulent accounts as grounds for his own arrest as an accessory. Dad, Marcus cried out as they pulled his arms behind his back. Dad, please, tell them I didn't know. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and looked at my son for what I knew would be one of the last times in a long while. You knew, Marcus, I said quietly. You signed your name to it. I taught you how to build something with your own hands. You chose to help tear something down instead. I turned to Harold. Let's go. Judge Renfro dismissed the case with prejudice and said she'd be referring the witnesses for perjury review. I walked out of that courthouse into the bright Atlanta sun, and for the first time in weeks I felt like I could breathe all the way down to the bottom of my lungs. 6 months later, I sold the house in East Point. I couldn't sit in those rooms anymore. The kitchen where I'd fed my son for 18 years. The driveway where I taught him to ride a bike. I moved down to a quiet stretch of coast near Savannah, bought a little fishing boat, and named her after my late wife, Dorothy. Renee was sentenced to 9 years for fraud and theft by deception. Marcus got 3 years as an accessory, the judge noting in her ruling that his tears in the courtroom looked more like regret over getting caught than remorse for what he'd done. About 4 months into my new life, a letter came from the correctional facility, written in pencil on a single sheet of yellow paper. Marcus asked for money for the commissary, said the food was terrible, said Renee had already filed for divorce, and was testifying against him to shave time off her own sentence. Said he was sorry. Sorry I'd been put through all this. Sorry it had to come to this. But nowhere in that letter did he say he was sorry for what he'd done to those women at our church. Nowhere did he say he was sorry for trying to make his own father bleed. I sat out on my dock that evening with the letter in my hands, watching the tide pull back from the shore, the way it does every evening down there, slow and patient and certain. I thought about sending him a little money, because old habits, old love, they don't disappear just because a man finally grows a spine. But I thought about that check I'd written, the one he was ready to grab before he even knew what it really meant. If I kept rescuing him now, I'd be teaching him the same lesson I'd been teaching him his whole life, that there were no real consequences, that Daddy would always find a way to make the bill disappear. I tore the letter in half, then in half again, until it was nothing but confetti, and I let the evening wind carry it off the end of the dock into the water. I didn't feel cruel. I didn't feel triumphant either. I just felt the quiet, steady relief of a man who finally understood that loving somebody and rescuing somebody from themselves are not always the same thing. We spend so much of our lives believing that real love means giving until there's nothing left of us, that sacrifice is the only proof that counts. But I learned, the hard way, in a courtroom full of strangers, that shielding the people we love from every hard consequence doesn't protect them. It only teaches them that someone else will always be there to absorb the cost of their choices. My son didn't need my money. He needed to learn what it feels like to stand on his own 2 feet, even if that standing happens behind a fence. If you believe peace is worth more than money, and that sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is finally say no, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and let me know in the comments, where are you watching from tonight, family? Real love isn't a blank check, family. Sometimes the kindest thing you can hand your child isn't money. It's the chance to stand on their own and feel what consequences feel like. Walter didn't lose a son that day in court. He just stopped carrying one who'd learned to take instead of build. Protect your peace. Protect what you worked for. And trust that the people who truly love you will never ask you to bleed for it. A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI for entertainment purposes, while hoping to share a positive life lesson with you.